Should you buy a Switch in 2025? Now that might sound like a weird question right before the Switch 2 comes out, but there are a few reasons you might want to do this. First and foremost, is it time to sell your existing Switch before prices tank? Or if you don't already have a Switch, you're maybe thinking about an upgrade, should you maybe just save the money and buy a Switch now versus grabbing a Switch 2 for who knows how much later this year? Well, today we're gonna take a close look at how well the Switch has aged, go through all the individual models, and take a look at a bunch of the games that maybe run well, and some that don't run so well, and what is about to be the most popular game console of all time. So let's start with a quick refresher on the individual Switch models, because there are three, although technically four. First of all, we have the original launch Switch. So this is probably the most successful model they've been selling at ever since 2017. Although one important thing to note is there are actually two versions of this. So back in 2019, I think, they released the red box version of the Switch. It is incredibly hard to tell the difference unless you look on the very back of the model. So this is a Switch HAC 001-01. Essentially the difference is that the original launch Switch had like 2 to 3 hours of battery life, and this model has close to like 4, maybe even 5 hours. Like, it is a tremendously large difference. So my first recommendation is if you're thinking about buying or selling your existing Switch, make sure you know the difference. Especially when you consider that a lot of launch Switches are coming up on 8 years old at this point, and a lot of those devices have spent years and years on a dock. The batteries have probably either gone flat or at least are severely downgraded. Alex, can you help me out? How much can I buy a red box Switch for on the used market?
So let's say that you go for a reputable retailer,
Yep.
GameStop,
GameStop, the most reputable, as reputable gets.
You can get it for $247.
How much can I get it for on a less reputable retailer like, I don't know, eBay, which is probably where I would get it for anyway?
You can get it for really excellent condition for roughly in the $240 range.
Now, I'm not gonna recommend you do this, but if I was going to go down to a launch Switch, which to be fair is the exact same performance, same screen, everything else, it's just a less efficient processor with much worse battery life. How much can I get one of those for?
A lot of retailers won't specify the launch edition, so like it won't say the HAC 001-1 or
because you could think you're getting a red box Switch and get one that has literally 30 minutes of battery life.
On eBay, it's a lot easier to search for these kinds of things. You can get those for pretty much $200, $210.
I'm surprised. Wow, Switches have really held their value. I thought you could get a Switch for like 170, 180 bucks now. It's actually still in the 200s for the most part. So my first recommendation, if you're thinking about getting a Switch, and you're thinking about one of the launch versions, consider that the batteries may need to be replaced, or it might just be a great console to live in the dock. After that, they decided to improve on things by releasing the Switch Lite. Let me tell you this. While yes, you may exclusively see these being used by 8-year-olds in the airport, however, they're onto something. I'm not just saying that I have little hands, but I will say that my personal Switch...
Look at those things. I had to zoom in to max to get that.
It's a perfectly average size hand, which appreciates using, this is actually my personal Switch Lite. It's easy to look at the silly colors and go, oh, it's just for kids, whatever. And yes, this is definitely a downgrade because it does not have any docking capability. However, if I fire it up, what you'll see is it is absolutely delightful to use. It is a 5-inch display, 5.5 inch, something like that. Is it 5? I think it's 5 flat, isn't it? No, that's bigger than 5.
It's 5.5.
5.5. Okay, I should have gone with my first. Well, you don't know how long your hands are? Because you don't have Joy-Cons, it actually feels much more sturdy, which has always been a problem with both the Switch as well as the OLED. I've never really liked the fact that like you get like that. I love the fact that I can just toss this in my bag and not think about it. And also, these things are dirt cheap. The Switch Lite, when it came out, was $200, which is still what the new pricing is. However, if I want to get one on the used market, it's probably free at this point, right?
Not quite free.
Essentially free.
So if you want to get it from GameStop, something like that, it'll be $170-ish.
Are you trying to tell me that a 2018 console is only depreciated $30?
If you want to search any number of resellers on eBay for like very good condition things, they will be in the $120 range.
Good deal.
Those things are be covered in feastable juice.
Now, I will say that the Switch Lite actually has a pretty good modding scene. Obviously, you can do simple stuff like clear cases and whatnot. You actually buy a 5.5-inch OLED display that will drop right in. There's still a lot of value in this, and considering that you can get it for the low $100 range, if you don't have a Switch right now, it's not a bad way to play a lot of games. However, if you want to be professional, you may want to consider the Switch OLED. The main claim to fame with this is a far better OLED display. So it's gotten larger, so it's a full 7-inch, but it's the same form factor. So if you look at the two Switches side by side, you'll see that it just has much, much narrower bezels. And we're gonna talk a lot about the Switch 2 in a second, But rumor on the street is it is not going to have an OLED display.
Sounds pretty Nintendo-y.
You know what? You're right. It also has a very nice kickstand, which is something that the Switch Lite completely lacks, and the Switch launch model has the derpy little tiny stand, which sucks. It also has double the internal capacity. Both the regular Switch and the Switch Lite only have 32 gigs, but the Switch OLED has 64, which you can kind of get away with depending on how many digital games you download. All three of these have the exact same performance. So you're not gonna get additional frames or anything like that with the Switch OLED. Your game's gonna look nicer because the Switch OLED display is great. But as soon as you drop either of these in a dock or something, there's absolutely no difference, right? How much can I buy a Switch OLED for?
From GameStop, you can get an OLED for around $300.
I would say that's probably worth it over buying the regular Switch because that display is just so much better. But how about on the used market?
It's around $270, $280 for good condition ones.
My initial recommendations, if you're considering buying a Switch in 2025, as far as the individual models, Switch Lite is the cheapest, probably the best. You can get a regular Switch if you don't really care about it for handheld use. You really just leave it on a dock because it may or may not have a good battery. And if you want the all-out, full, best experience possible, the Switch OLED is great. But I cannot recommend this pretty much under any circumstances. It is way too expensive, and as we're talking about in a second, I'm gonna guess that this is gonna be a little too close in price to the Switch 2, which besides the display should obviously be a huge upgrade. But how well do games still run on the existing Switch? Because we took a look at this last year, and there were a whole bunch of games which were, how should we say, maybe running less than optimally. Let's start out by playing the one and only Fortnite, which yes, is still being supported on the Switch. I would also say this is probably an example of a game that's probably better on almost any other platform you can play it on. And it does say something about the power of the Switch hardware. That even a game that can look terrific on an RTX 5090 also looks like it exists on the Switch.
Saying it looks is a perfect way to describe a Switch game.
Oof.
All right,
Yikes.
so we're in.
Oh no.
As you can see, we are getting a number of frames per second.
Oh, what the heck is all that clipping? What the?
What clipping? What are you talking about? It looks great.
That bot that you killed might not be a bot. It might just be somebody playing on a Switch.
Wow! Brutal. I will say, once I'm on the ground, it's not terrible. The frame rate is 30 FPS adjacent. Okay, I lost. That was less than and a little anticlimactic. That was definitely a bot too.
You missed so many times.
It does still work. And I will actually, it feels a little bit better. Last time I played this, it was actually like 15 FPS. Once you're on the ground, I'd say you're like 26. However, a game that's impeccably well optimized is Pokemon Violet. The game that everyone knows runs flawlessly and looks great. They're very busy working on next generation. They just forgot to finish the Switch version.
What do you mean they're very big? They said that about the, okay, no, I'm fine.
So look, I put a lot of hours into Scarlet. It is a terrific game, right? I honestly think it's one of the best Pokemon games. I know that most people might not agree, especially when you run into loading screens and you're supposedly open world. This is a good example of an exclusive that only runs on the Switch. As you can see, the loading times are terrible. If you can put aside your massive amount of technical Digital Foundry knowledge, what you will see is that it is a terrific game that is a lot of fun. Now, are these arguments to maybe just buy a Switch 2 and play it over there? Perhaps. In fact, hopefully this game actually sees a patch to work better on the Switch 2.
Can you change that angle in the game?
This is a game that the Switch Lite actually makes sense for, because while the game looks a little bit blurry and a little bit aliased, on the smaller screen, it actually looks better. And I will say that is the case for all of these things.
Are you reading an argument for CRTs?
Look, we've taken a look at what you can do with the Switch Lite.
Oh.
It's fine. I need to swap to the back shell anyway. But let me actually take a look at what we can do with the Switch OLED, which has a much larger and theoretically better 7-inch display, which is...
It's not theoretical. That is much
theoretically better. I mean, you can see on camera, this display is so much brighter, so much more contrasty. The viewing angles are far superior, the color. Like, I mean, the OLED is great. Actually, I turn my brightness down because it's so dang bright. Like, look at that. I mean, just look at how great this game looks. As much as I might be a fan of the Switch form factor, the reason why you buy a Switch, and really the reason why you're gonna buy a Switch 2, is for the games, and specifically the exclusive games. You just can't, without sailing the high seas, play these games on any other platform.
Why don't you play Mortal Kombat?
You know, some games run better than others. So this is a great look at what you can get with an existing Switch. And there are still big AAA games, or at least AA games, that are coming out on the Switch later this year, including Pokemon Legends ZA. We've got
End of list.
No, there's more. So now that we've got a good sense for what the Switch will do in 2025, which is play a lot of games pretty okay, some games very well, and a lot of games kind of bad. But let's take a closer look at what this is going to mean for the Switch 2. So let's start by talking about what is confirmed with the Switch 2. So we'll have a larger display. We don't have the exact number. It's likely going to be somewhere in that 7.5-inch range, and the entire Switch itself will be physically larger than the existing model. Now this has a lot of benefits, especially when it comes to the Joy-Cons, which I'll be honest, as much as they've been a nice sort of gimmick, now they're going to not only be magnetic, which is a huge win over the sort of fiddly rails, but importantly, they're going to be taller, which means that they should hopefully fit better in human-sized hands. Now, this is maybe not completely confirmed, but the launch video very much made it seem like you can use the Joy-Cons to have some kind of mousing capability, which I think will actually be cool. That's one of the things that is actually unique and sort of different about this whole thing. There is, of course, one major downside. Now, this is not confirmed, but it's heavily rumored, so I'm going to mention it here right on the top, which is that the Switch 2 is likely going to have an LCD display instead of an OLED display. Other things that we know, we're going to have dual USB-C ports, which is very lovely. You're also going to have an improved kickstand. That improved kickstand is probably roughly the same as the Switch OLED. I do think it's worth mentioning that the Switch 2 is a very modest upgrade over the Switch 1 when it comes to the design. Like, yes, you've got like the magnetic Joy-Cons, and yes, it should have dual fans instead of a single fan, which will help it to push a little bit more performance, a little bit more power. But ultimately, they're really taking what worked with the Switch 1 and making the second version. There will also be a brand new dock for the Switch 2, as well as backwards compatibility. This is honestly maybe the most important thing with the Switch 2. Knowing that your Switch 1 games should work pretty much one-to-one on the Switch 2 is a huge thumbs up. It does open up a lot of questions as far as what games will be cross-generational, because as of right now, Nintendo have not announced any games that is going to be held for the Nintendo Direct here on April 2nd. However, my strong expectation is that a number of games that are going to be launched for the Switch 2 will also see a Switch 1 port. So the Switch 2 has been one of the most leaked consoles in a very long time. The actual chip inside should still be developed by NVIDIA, and in fact, it should be very similar to a video we did almost 2 years ago, where we got our hands on a development kit which is very much similar to what the Switch 2 should be shipping with. And what we found in that video is that this is going to be a console which is going to be more powerful than the existing Switch, but also not an huge upgrade, right? If you're thinking this is going to be competing with the high end of PC handhelds, it just simply won't. Now, it should have NVIDIA's DLSS, which will help to upscale the image to help get you more image quality without completely ruining your battery life. Now, powering this is going to be not only that NVIDIA chip, but it seems like a huge upgrade in RAM to 12 gigabytes as opposed to 4 gigabytes on the Switch 1. It also is supposedly going to have significantly more storage, maybe even up to 256 gigabytes. Now, one thing that they haven't confirmed yet is whether or not it will have a micro SD card on the Switch 2. Now, I expect that it will, and I expect you're still going to probably want to use that. However, having more internal storage, especially if they ever get Nintendo Switch Online better sorted, will be a nice touch. Again, I don't want to go incredibly deep on the spec side of things without final confirmation, but with the understanding that we're looking at something in the neighborhood of Steam Deck performance, maybe a little bit higher, probably like 3, maybe even 4 times the performance of the Switch 1. So a huge jump up when it comes to GPU as well as CPU resource. Now, I don't want to oversell the technical performance of the Switch 2, because it is not going to be cutting edge. But importantly, the real thing to take away is that for fully optimized Switch 2 games, they should look great. And for games that are being ported from other consoles, it should be able to run not only PS4 era games, but it should be able to run current generation stuff that runs on the PS5, that runs on the Steam Deck. This does give me a lot of confidence that the Switch 2 will not be absurdly expensive. Nintendo have pretty famously, unlike Sony and Microsoft, focused on selling their hardware at a profit. And that should continue with the Switch 2, which means that they do have to cut some corners to actually get this thing out the door at a reasonable price. The rumor is it will be $350 to $400. I think $350 is probably my guess, because that's the sort of price of the Switch OLED as of right now. But everything I'm seeing with this, between the supposed LCD display, between the less than absolute cutting edge specs, feels like it is going to be a little bit more reasonably priced than something like Steam Deck OLED, which can push $500. If the Switch 2 is more than $400, I think they're going to have problems. That actually brings me to my next point as far as what this means for the Switch 1. Because think about it, right now they're still selling the red box Switch, they're selling the Switch Lite, as well as the Switch OLED. Now, Nintendo recently said that they're not discounting the Switch, yet, and what I would expect. Once they fully announce all the details of the Switch 2, the original Switch will get a price cut. If it's me, they're getting the Switch OLED out of there ASAP. It does not make sense to sell a Switch with a better screen than the new version. And I do think this will actually impact the resale market. So I would also say that if you were thinking about selling your Switch and using that money to buy a Switch 2, now's probably a pretty good time. And we just discussed how relatively expensive the Switches still are. Now on the flip side, if you were considering buying a Nintendo Switch right now in 2025, if they drop a price cut in the next few months, that will change the story, but I'm recording this as of MSRPs all being static of $200, $300, and $350 respectively, and you should not buy any of those at full price right now. If you really want to switch, my actual legitimate recommendation is to buy a Switch Lite. You can get it for cheap. You'll be able to probably flip it in a few months if you really don't like it and you want to go up to a Switch 2 for about what you buy it for, and they're still going to be able to play all of those exclusives and whatnot. But I think for most sane people, if you're thinking about buying a Switch in 2025, don't do that. Just be patient. There is no doubt that the Nintendo Switch is going to go down in history as one of the most important consoles of all time. I absolutely do not think we would be living in a world with Steam Decks and ROG allies if the Switch had not blazed the trail to begin with. It has clearly been enormously successful for Nintendo, outselling not only its predecessor of the Wii U, but becoming, by the end of the run, maybe the most popular and successful console of all time, period. What do you think about the Switch 1 and its legacy, and how do you think the Switch 2 is going to impact that? Definitely be sure to let me know in the comments below. Definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel as well if you enjoyed my Switch Lite love fest. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to go replace the shell on my Switch Lite because I think I broke it.